You've got a plane or no, a
No, no,
client.
a client.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah.
Welcome back to today's episode of Unapologetic Living. I'm Elizabeth Elliott. I'm excited to be here with Martha Carlin again. This is our second um, conversation together, right? Yeah, because I had you on the show 2 years ago, and we predominantly spoke about the sugar shift and your probiotic biotic quest, and then your husband's story, your all's story around Parkinson's. I know you were um, searching deeply to find, I don't know if necessarily a cure would be the answer, but I know that you were, seeking to understand why, how, what to do about it, how to prevent. And so I'm just glad to have you back. Welcome, Martha. And I know since then you've lost John, and I am really sorry to hear that. And I don't know when was that last year?
September of 2024. So it probably was
Oh,
not that long after we did our interview.
I guess so. I don't remember when that was. It was in May, and I started this in 20, I can't remember. This is the
Yeah.
third season.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably 2 years ago. So yeah,
Yeah.
it probably wasn't too long after. So I know since then you've written a book, Connect,
Connected. Here it is. I don't
Connected.
know if you can see it, but
And I just love the front. I love that leaf. I think it's beautiful. And I know that it has a lot to do with your story and you said your love story around, your 24-year love story with John and your seeking to understand Parkinson's better. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
sure. So the full title is Connected: Love, Loss, and the Unseen Forces Behind Chronic Disease. And um, maybe just a tiny bit about that's maybe a repeat, but John was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was 44. And he was diagnosed a few months after he ran the San Diego Marathon. So here's a 44-year-old young man who looks healthy on the outside, and he's diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so that, like for me, I'm like, how does a young person who looks healthy get an old person's disease? Something's going on in the inside in a big way that we're missing. And so that really launched a 24-year exploration of trying to understand what factors could be affecting somebody that young. And along the way, I also found that the number of people under the age of 40 was doubling in each of the last 2 decades. And that, for me, was a big sign that environmental factors are a big piece of the puzzle, because historically, Parkinson's has been an old person's disease, but now it's not so much. There are more and more young people getting the disease. And so, so the book goes into a lot of the details of our life together, the things that we did in exploring Parkinson's, but also into the fact that your life isn't over when you get diagnosed with Parkinson's. And um, that's one kind of piece of the puzzle, I would say. There's a not just the Parkinson's diagnosis, but even before the Parkinson's diagnosis. Um, in the last 2 years, I was also working on a docu-series called Voices of Parkinson's, interviewing people with Parkinson's along with my co-producer Lisa Samansky of the Resolve Parkinson's Foundation. And what we've done 35 interviews so far, and what we found pretty universal in those discussions is that there has been either an event in close proximity, but not always in close proximity, that was very stressful or very emotionally upsetting, some sort of traumatic event. And that can be anywhere from losing a job, losing a parent, losing a child, something that has kind of shattered the worldview of who I am as a person. And that this unresolved grief and trauma is trapped in the body. And um, so there's an emotional component to it that really has never been discussed in the scientific literature anyway. Um, and there's also this aspect that has been discussed by at least one traditional Chinese medicine doctor about, she has a book called Stuck on Pause. And in that book, she talks about that there's an event somewhere in life. Of course, she talks about this life or in a prior life. Now, not everybody may believe in reincarnation, but she talks about this as a, you know, something deep inside where a switch has been flipped where they feel like they are in immediate danger of death, and this fear turns on and they get over into sympathetic nervous system and are unable to turn that off and get back into parasympathetic. And she does a lot of work around, trying to get people to reset the nervous system back into parasympathetic. But I tell a story in the book that I really hadn't connected to that until after John passed away. And we lived in Colorado, and he went on a rafting trip uh, in 1997. So he was diagnosed in 2002. In 1997, he went on a rafting trip down the Gunnison River. And if anybody's not familiar with the Gunnison Canyon, it's the river is one of the most dangerous rivers in the United States. And he went with two of his fishing buddies. They had a brand new raft that they had not taken out. So it was sort of the christening ride of this raft. And it was his two fishing buddies and one of them's 14-year-old son. And on the first day on the river, they flipped the raft and pinned it against a rock. They Two of them were pinned underwater. They did eventually pop up. And the canyons of the Gunnison River are so steep that you cannot climb them. And the water temperature is about 45 degrees, so hypothermic. And the only way out was to float down the river fortunately, they had life vests on, float down the river feet first for about 36 hours in that cold water. And, as I was writing the chapter about that book, it just all clicked for me that, of course, the body is sensing, really imminent danger of death because, there's lots of people who die on the Gunnison River who are in boats. It's kind of crazy that they even made it out. And so, these are aspects of Parkinson's that are rarely discussed, but I think are a big, big, big piece of the puzzle. And so I talk about those in here. I also talk about some of the spiritual aspects of feeling unworthy or unworthy of love, God's love. Um, and that's that's a whole nother area that is rarely discussed. And then, of course, I talk about environmental factors. And, there are many things I think that can, if we learn to recognize what might be the early triggers or signs, that we could turn people back from ever getting Parkinson's.
You mentioned a few things. I know Joe has multiple sclerosis or was diagnosed with it. We try not to, attach ourselves too much to it, but in reading the book When the Body Says No, I don't know, have you read that one?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think it's very similar in Gabor Mate's work that he's found, like when after talking with many, and we're only like into chapter 2 or 3, but chapter 2 does a deep dive into multiple sclerosis and the many patients who are diagnosed with multiple, and how typically there is something
right.
prior to. And I wonder, I guess you said your husband, had run this marathon. Do you feel as though, because training for a marathon is also stressful on the body, despite its benefits, right? There's a lot of stress put on the body. Not to say that that caused it, right? I mean, I think it's it's multifaceted.
Well, I actually have a chapter in the book called Exercise with Care, or maybe it's Movement as Medicine. John was a endurance athlete most of his life. And one of the things that I learned in that process of examining that and in writing the book is, the kind of stress that puts on the body. It actually started from me trying to help kind of a famous Ironman marathon runner and looking at what happens metabolically in the body. And of course, when you're doing a very long distance run, you're putting mechanical stress, the pounding motion, you're putting electrolyte stress. So you're running out of electrolytes and then, loading electrolytes when you stop at a station. So you're getting these really big swings in electrolytes. But, I'm a gut microbiome person. And one of the more interesting aspects of it to me is as you're doing this running, you end up, the blood moves out to the muscles and away from the digestive tract. So it's moving out to where it's really needed. But when you stop the run, the blood rushes back into the areas where so your gut lining and that whole area gets a reperfusion of blood. And there's something called reperfusion injury where that blood rushing back in can damage the blood vessels in that lining. And that's part of what causes leaky gut. And the bacteria, the endotoxin from gram-negative bacteria in the gut, people who are runners often carbohydrate load, and that feeds a more negative profile of microbiome. And then, that reperfusion injury opens up those barriers and allows the endotoxin to cross over. And that's very inflammatory. And, runners or endurance athletes will often report kind of a crash the day after. And the inflammatory endotoxin goes wherever the weakness is. So that could be the joints, that can be the brain. And there are lots of animal models of, diabetes, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's, different where endotoxin is used to cause inflammation in different parts of the body. And I believe maybe even in MS. And Parkinson's and MS both have damage to the myelin sheath. And that, the endurance pounding, that mechanical structural motion is also going to be damaging to those structures that of the body that surround our cells and our nerves.
That makes sense. I'm just like thinking about these different pieces, and then Joe is. You mentioned the parasympathetic and sympathetic. Joe is also a cyclist, but he was also a road cyclist, so mountain biker and road cyclist, and that's an endurance athlete as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some heavy training, and there's also that carb loading that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by the human body and like trying to piece it all together. I also believe that there are metaphysical reasons for dis-ease in the body. I don't want to use the word disease, but if we've been diagnosed with something, typically there's something out of alignment, right? There's a dis-ease in the body, and um, it's just also interesting that my daughter-in-law's grandmother passed Parkinson's. She had Parkinson's. She passed in January.
Mhm.
And then I'm working with an adult with disabilities whose mother also has Parkinson's right now. And I have a client whose brother was diagnosed just recently with Parkinson's. And I can't speak to my client's mother. I do know my client's brother, when looking back, because he was just diagnosed, that there was some depression, I think, and anxiety prior to that diagnosis. I mean, it wasn't, if you look back, aside from that event on the river, were there signs before John's diagnosis at 44?
Well, so I write about stress, like
Hmm.
low, sort of a low grade chronic stress that um, burns up a lot of our minerals. Stress does. There's also there's a scientist named Hans Selye, Selye, who did a lot of research around stress and stress's impact on the body. And that's one of the things I do talk about in the book is, our story leading up to the diagnosis. You just think about you're just going through life and you're dealing with things, and some people deal with stress a lot better and are more resilient than other people. And we had a lot of stress. I worked out of town, like I traveled 50% of the time for my job, and we had two young children together, and then we had like a preteen. Uh, my son from another marriage, and um, that he had to take care of the household while I was traveling, and there was a lot of stress there. He was also he was involved in Douglas County Search and Rescue in Colorado, which is like there's a part of the Rampart Range of the Colorado, the mountains there in Douglas County, and so when I wasn't out of town, he would often get called in the middle of the night to go, uh, on a search and rescue mission and be up all night. So sleep disruption. There's just like all these little pieces where you think, oh, it's just life, or it's just, but you get these compounding effects. And there's something called allostatic load, which is sort of the building of stressors in the body, where you kind of reach a point where there's a straw that breaks the camel's back, and it maybe doesn't make sense what it is, but there's been this building of chronic stressors over time that has, overstressed that load in the body.
Yeah. And then the inability to, um, I guess, regulate the nervous system, being able to flow right between the two, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, because they're both necessary, right?
Right.
And I think that's where it becomes difficult. And I think many people, as you said, like you're just kind of going through the days, not realizing that you aren't dropping back into that parasympathetic.
Right.
So now, does your book dive into and like dig into modalities that you all looked into or tried to integrate during that 24-year journey together?
It does it talks about some of that, diet being one of those, one of the most important, changing the diet and getting away from the herbicides and pesticides, going all organic and, making our best effort to move away from processed foods. Um, the exercise, we do talk about exercise because John was very involved with setting up Pedaling for Parkinson's, which is a nonprofit that's now part of the Davis Phinney Foundation that does spin biking classes for people with Parkinson's, and they've actually found through pretty rigorous study that biking at a cadence of 80 to 90 RPMs for 1 hour, 3 to 4 times a week can reduce Parkinson's symptoms by 35%.
Oh, wow.
So, that was John was very involved with bringing that out across the country to different areas and rec centers and YMCA's. And Davis Phinney even runs an online course for people who have a spin cycle at home. They can get online and share with other people with Parkinson's and spin together. I think it's 3 or 4 times a week, so that's pretty nice. So we talk about that. I think I talk about water in there and the uh water quality being a big issue. And that's something we're here in Kentucky. Uh I don't talk specifically about this in the book, but one of the things that I started looking at after I moved back here to Kentucky um was water quality because Kentucky has the largest watershed of any state in the continental United States. Alaska has more, but which is kind of interesting. So all that water from the northern states above us is flowing down into the Ohio River Basin and into our water supply. And that's a lot of chemicals because, that's the big industrial corridor of America sits above Kentucky. And Kentucky has some of the highest rates of cancer, of Parkinson's, of a lot of these, diabetes, chronic diseases. And, those chemicals flowing down and in our public water supply. So the public water treats bacteria. It doesn't really focus on those chemicals. And then it's treating the bacteria with chlorine, and chlorine is killing the bacteria in your gut. So, I one of the things I often recommend to people is that they get a good quality water filter. And I do have at the back of the book, I have a little bit of a guideline called A Simple Place to Start. And then uh, I think you've probably been given, we have a page like if people buy the book and they go to the page, I'll send it to you if you don't have it. I'm not remembering off the top. I think it's like BiotiQuest/book or something, but they can put their email in and we'll send them a more detailed, simple place to start and a PDF of another book that I wrote called My Search for the Perfect Poop.
Oh, I like that name. So which water, like when in this research into water, which water, I know like we have a reverse osmosis on the countertop and we remineralize. Uh, and then more recently, we've added in the my use swirl for the structured water. Do you like spring water? Do you like RO? Do you like distilled? Because I know it, they all probably have their purpose too.
Yeah, well, I have to get a new Mayu thing because I dropped it and the glass broke.
I always worry about that. It's kind of delicate, isn't it?
It is delicate. I had it for about a year before I did that, but that's on my list of things to do, and I keep forgetting. Um, well, when we moved back here, so in each of the houses, so John got diagnosed in 2002. In 2005, we built a new house and we put in a very sophisticated custom water filtration system and reverse osmosis. And he was pretty stable for about the 9 years that we lived in that house. I did not know about remineralizing the RO water at that time. And so, I'm sure we got a little mineral depleted out of that.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think perhaps in the process, um, some of what got pulled out was probably heavy metals, which, you know, was not a bad thing. And we had a house that had copper pipes. So we did get sufficient copper while we were living in that house, just from being in the bathtub or that sort of thing. Um, and then we moved temporarily, and we saw a dramatic change in um, the and John, really, in a month's time, when we started drinking the tap water at a condo we lived in the interim. And so we got a Berkey water filter then, and that seemed to help somewhat, but we ended up, buying a house and installing a whole house filter and reverse osmosis, and um, things improved again. And then we moved here, and it took us almost a year to get the filtration system in. And here is a really sophisticated system that was based on studying our water and um, like designing the filters for our particular water system.
I gotcha. That's cool. I know, yeah. It's interesting that you definitely that you saw a difference from the tap water in and people don't, I think, understand the importance of the quality of water. And I know, here in Louisville, right? Louisville Pure Tap. I'm not going to knock it, but you know what? I am actually. And then you've got the fluoride in there too, and it doesn't, take into consideration some of the even the pharmaceutical residues that so many people find themselves unknowingly drinking, and the anti-anxiety medications, anything else that goes along with
Right.
that, right? I mean,
I
we're
said,
bombarded all the time. And that's why I say it's never just one thing. You've got your water, you've got your food, you've got the herbicides, the pesticides, the vaccines, the environmental toxins, household cleaning products, and you have your emotional stress. It's like never just like one thing.
right. It's layers. And that's really what I talk about in the book. And scientist friend of mine who got an advanced copy and read it. Um, she her comment was that, not being a trained scientist, so I didn't really have, the dogmatic training that you get in school. I taught myself, and in the process of teaching myself, I came to really understand the flaws in the science that we have done by, looking deeply at the methods of the science and just coming to understand how reductionist everything we have done over the last, 50 years has been, looking at smaller and smaller parts instead of the whole. And, we are a whole system. We are an ecosystem. We live within an ecosystem. And all of those are interconnected in large part by the microbes. And so all of those pieces really, I think, calls for a new kind of science that looks at the whole person and looks at, how we fit into the larger ecosystem. And I've often said to people, like, what you do out there, if you think, oh, I'm just spraying the little crack in my driveway so it doesn't have a weed in it. It's not out there. All of that eventually is in here.
Yeah, I have some really good friends and I love them. And they eat really clean and they exercise and they have, a prayer practice and all of these different things, right? Trying to nurture mind, body, and spirit. And I pulled up one day to take a walk with her and they were spraying Kindle and I was like, "Oh my gosh." I was like, I had to give her a little bit of a hard time, but she
Eh,
she kind of said I hadn't really thought about it. And I'm like, I knew I couldn't even get out of the car while this guy's doing this thing. He's not masked. Like
Yeah.
and you see that a lot. And so when I honestly see some of these yards that had, we believe in this and we love every blah, blah, blah. Well, you don't love me. You're spraying. How much do you love us? Because you're spraying these toxic chemicals in your yard, which is getting into the air, which is getting into our water and our foods. And, ultimately,
They don't know. I mean, like,
I
I'm
know.
really, I'm really shocked, because I've spent a lot of time looking at glyphosate.
Hmm.
Um, and, because John was drinking soy protein shakes every day for about 2 years before his Parkinson's diagnosis. Now, I don't think that's the sole cause of his Parkinson's, but I do think that's a contributing factor, because glyphosate is antibiotic and there's a lot of downstream effects there. Um, but I'm just kind of shocked by the number of people who don't really understand what glyphosate is, or that it's, pretty much sprayed on all the food not all of it, but a huge percentage of the food we're eating. It's not just corn and soy. There are 60 other crops that use it at the end of harvest to dry, and they have even more residues. And that's, things like lentils, or, a lot of your like a vegetarian. Somebody who's vegetarian or vegan is getting exposed to a tremendous amount of glyphosate, and they don't even, many of them, realize it.
I think it would be almost, I'm not to be a Debbie Downer, but even just saying, okay, so a lot of crops are sprayed with this chemical. Well, it's in I would think no matter what, we're all getting a little touch of it if it's being sprayed that heavily,
Right.
right? In the what in the cross pollination or just again in the soil, um, and it too, right? From what does it create the zonulin in the body, which creates some of the dysfunction? How does that in
No,
the
but
gut?
I think I'd have to go back. I was actually looking at something related to zonulin's really downstream of the bigger issue, which is disruption of the glycocalyx. And glyphosate does disrupt the glycocalyx. And it is dehydrating. Part of its action is dehydrating. And the glycocalyx is supposed to be this very hydrated, protective layer around each of our cells, or, on that, in that gut lining, the lining of the brain, the lining of our blood vessels, all of that. So, and yeah, people just they don't realize where it is. But if you're eating out even if you're super clean with how you eat, if you're eating out in restaurants ever, you're exposed to it. If you're not filtering your water, you're probably exposed to it in your water. A great place to look is Moms Across America. They've done tons of testing in the different foods. A lot of the, like, one of the shocking things for me was like Cheerios. Like, I mean, my kids are all grown now, but I mean, everybody who's got a baby is like, they're playing with the Cheerios and picking them up. And Cheerios were one of the absolute worst.
Yeah, I didn't know about the glyphosate. There are definitely, I was buying the Cascadian Farms. Not that that's better. I know it's a General Mills product. I'm not sure. Uh, but I didn't ever do those Cheerios for my kids. There were other things, I'm sure. I tried when they were small. I want to go back though to the title of your book, Connected. And, I am a body worker and work on the fascia. And, we know the fascia is connected to the limbic part of the brain and our muscles, our memories, our memories, trauma is
Yeah.
all stored in this connective tissue. And when I think about, I was actually just listening to, it's a free audio book on Spotify called Free Your Fascia. But you're thinking about the water and the fluids that move through this connective tissue, right? And then you're thinking about, as you mentioned, the pounding, right? The mechanical um, and then
Stress.
maybe the stressors of the accident that I say accident the boat tipping over in the river, right? And any other, and then the emotional stressors of you being gone while he's holding down the fort with the kids because of your work, you know. And then you also mentioned, right, so you've got the maybe the metaphysical piece, but you also mentioned the spiritual component. And I um, deeply believe that really all of these pieces must be balanced to find that true health, and spirituality is a huge part of that. So I don't know, maybe elaborate. You mentioned for just like one moment that a spiritual mode is that one is not worthy of God's love. And I would love to learn more about that.
Well, I mean, that really didn't come into my awareness until the last 6 months of John's life. Um, we had been working a lot on forgiveness and, had a forgiveness prayer. He had some family issues uh, with one of his siblings. And um, so we had been working through this forgiveness prayer. But I had a friend who was traveling through here on the way to a conference, and she stayed with us. And um, they had a biofeedback machine. It's a little bit different than Robin's, but they tried to get a reading on him, and it took him almost an hour to get any kind of electrical signal from him. And then when the report came back on what the issues are, one of them, I don't remember exactly what she said it was, but it related to something spiritual. Um, and some people will go, "What are you talking about?" But anyway, they walked into the other room, and I sat down with her son for him to run mine. And when they walked into the other room, she said to John, "You know God loves you, don't you?" And the moment she said that, he froze and almost could not walk for the better part of a day. And I was going, I was also scheduled to go to this conference, and I was really concerned because um, he wasn't able to really walk. And that was very unusual for him. He had, been doing pretty well up to that point, although he did have a lot of long COVID symptoms. But like something in that statement of, God loves you had really rocked his world. And so then we started to work on that. And John was John was raised Catholic, and I'm not bashing any particular religion, but a lot of our religions start foundationally with this, over focus on sin and how bad we are. Like that we can't possibly be worthy. They do eventually get around to the grace of God and, forgiveness and all of that. But there's so much unworthiness built into the structures of a lot of our religion, that it makes us feel that it's unachievable, that God couldn't possibly love us. We're not worthy of that because we're so awful. And so that started a whole process of trying to work through worthiness and understanding, that God loves all of us.
Yes, it's almost like, I don't know, contradictory right here. If we were so unworthy, why would he?
Right.
Right? I mean, like
Yeah.
it
Why
almost
would
doesn't.
why would we even be here?
Exactly. If we're that unworthy, why would we be here? If we're that um, you know, yeah,
Rotten.
yeah, yeah. And that full of sin. I do think that's interesting. Do you feel like those last 6 months, as you were able to work through that? And I think some of that, I would imagine, has to do with self-forgiveness as well, not just like the forgiving
Yeah.
of others or the sibling or the
Yeah.
relationships, but also ourselves.
Yeah, and that a part of the prayer that we would say every night before bed was, forgiving ourselves, forgiving, you know, everybody. Um, and I have a chapter in the book called The Mouth of God. And um, in I don't know if it's yoga or some of the Eastern religions, I think, call this part of the brain the mouth of God, this base of the skull.
Hmm.
And you know there there's there's a connection to the fascial chain, to the information that we're getting, to like and I when I was writing the book, I listened to an episode on um, Radio Lab about the cerebellum, and all these pieces just kind of came together about, it's like the timing engine of the brain, and in Parkinson's it's like the timing is off. um, but it's like this is, if you think about like prayer and, the bowing of the head, which is making this straight line up, and this mouth of God is supposed to be like where the breath of life comes through, and the voice of God that speaks to us. And so like I feel like this section of the brain, which is also hyper turned on in fear in Parkinson's, is closing out that voice because, there's a feeling of unworthiness.
Well, and then okay, so then you're talking about that, but I'm thinking about the fluid and the cerebral spinal fluid, right? That pulsates
Mm-hmm.
up the back to the
Mm-hmm.
third eye.
Mm-hmm.
And if things are constricted, right,
Yeah,
it's gonna disrupt that flow. So
it's blocked.
did you ever weave any breathing, like any breath work in to I know that's I just keep coming back to that for me is breath work and the importance of it. And as you said, the breath of God, I know like you've got this, when I think of the Eastern philosophies, your throat chakra, this is where we speak up. This is where we can make that higher vibrational frequency, Om, Amen, like that's coming out, singing, talking, making love. Like there's a lot that goes on with this.
Right. Well, and people with Parkinson's often lose their voice,
Mm.
um, which, I think is interesting because, one of the things I recognized in myself and in other wives of people, of men with Parkinson's, is there's often a very strong female personality that there, the husband, um, that it's creating stress, but it's also like, I was very until I recognized what I was doing, because I'm type A, I'm hyper demanding, I have high expectations, then that also contributes to this feeling of unworthiness, because you could never fully meet my expectations, because, I just would set the standard so far out of reach. Um, and, you know, that's not that's not helpful either. But I think the cerebrospinal fluid, like all of those pieces are, I think, important and not really well connected in the research or what people talk about. And so I, in that chapter, I tried to bring all of those pieces together and really talk about how we address that. I don't think I talked about breath, but I did talk about forgiveness and, you know, breathing. They did do breathing in John's biking class, like working on that. But as a marathon runner, he was also, interestingly, upper chest breather. Because when you're in that sort of long endurance, you're in essentially what is a fight or flight state, and you're breathing in the upper chest. We did try to do some work. I don't know if you're familiar with block therapy, but there's, no, it's not anywhere within reach, but there's this a wooden or a bamboo block that you put under your rib cage just by your diaphragm, and you like on a bed where it's not totally hard against the floor, but you do compression to try to release the stuck fascia, so that the diaphragm can move and you can breathe more deeply. But by the time, we started to do that work, it was already so stiff and so much adhesion in there. It was very painful, and he did not want to really do that work. And I don't blame him. I mean,
Mhm.
I do it now for my feet, and it can be unpleasant, but it's amazing when you start to unlock those adhesions, how good you can feel.
Yeah, there's a gal I follow. Her name is Brooke McPoyle. She founded Musical Breathwork, and actually a video just popped up this morning as like, a quick clip on Instagram. And she really speaks to starting with the feet from the ground up, right? There's a lot going on. And actually, I'm not an affiliate for this, but we found this soulmate.
Oh,
So see how it's sort of this
yeah,
fork goes on the ground,
yeah,
and you really work on targeting the fascia on the bottom of the feet. And then there's two of them, and then it comes with this little roller. Um, we don't do it enough. This roller. So there's two of these. This little roller fits in here, but after that, you put the two together, and you're putting them in certain, formations on the ground, and you work on your balance. So you're standing on top of them with your heel
right,
lifted, with the ball, your foot lifted. You're working all right, and it
right.
is really crazy how even just working with the feet alone can change the whole structure
Yeah.
of the body.
I didn't really understand that until, I'm going to say, the last year. The importance of the feet, and my neuromuscular person that we've worked with for a long time, she made the comment to me, death starts in the feet. And I have a Substack called Martha's Quest,
Mhm.
and I wrote an article called Death Starts in the Feet, and really talking about like proprioception in the feet, and when we lose that, what happens and how that contributes to um, our loss of balance, because it goes all the way up the chain into the vestibular system where our balance is, and then we fall more. And anyway, I went into that. It was like the most read piece I've ever written, and so I have been doing a series on the feet, and different things you can do for your feet. So I'm going to have to look at that soulmate. And
Oh yeah, it's really cool. And again, like in some of the activities, you might be balancing a hacky sack on your head and then lowering down and touching different areas in front and around your body. I think, I mean, like I see the value, and I just need
Mhm.
to implement it, every week,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
and you feel like, well, there's only so much time in a day. Um, so if we can move forward. I know I had a gentleman on my podcast. His name was John Hopkins. He wrote, oh my goodness, let me think. He has a Substack as well. And I think his website is called Dying to Find Purpose.
Mm.
And he's become a death doula. So I guess, do you feel like as John worked on the forgiveness piece? Did you and found the worthiness of God's love, that it was easier for the transition to the afterlife?
I mean, I have a pretty, it was hard for me to write. I had to rewrite it multiple times, but I did. So John had a pulmonary embolism that was, um, there's not that much understanding, again, because we have this reductionist way of looking at things, but there's a cardiovascular component to Parkinson's, and John had a pulmonary embolism, and he was resuscitated by EMS. but never regained consciousness and we were all in the hospital with him uh, for 5 days. And that 5 days was really remarkable, despite the fact that he didn't regain consciousness. I mean, he sent messages from like the day before he passed away. His Pilates teacher from Colorado texted my son and said, "Okay, I have hesitated to contact you, but John has come to me so many times that he's like, you need to tell them to play Brown Eyed Girl."
Mm,
And that is the song that we play for our daughter who has big brown eyes.
mm,
And it's the ringtone on both of our phones when she calls us. And it was like,
mm,
okay. And I played it, and, I played it that night and the next morning. And then, actually, the morning that John passed away, our son Jack and daughter Mary Mac came to the hospital that morning about 6 o'clock. And earlier in the morning, I think the nurse knew that John was, the breathing changes. And she came in and asked me to tell her about our life together.
mm,
And, I think that it allowed him to hear again how special our life was. And then our kids came, and they were scared. One of them had a dream with the Grim Reaper in it, and I said, well, let's say these prayers that uh, we've been saying.
mhm,
And one of the prayers was also a clearing prayer of clearing, like, I don't remember the exact words, but it was any negative uh, thing that was either his or his ancestors. And it was clearing it for all of his ancestors. So for me and my ancestors. And of course, I had been saying that with him for months, but I'm not one of his ancestors. And when the kids said the words,
mhm,
I think it was like he felt like he could let go because they were saying it and clearing it for all the ancestral line, which, to some people may sound weird, but I think it was, very much like a last piece of release and peace for him. Yeah.
mhm. Well, yeah, I've heard that. The clearing of what wounds 7 years, 7 generations back and 7 generations forward.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, that can be hard to like fully wrap your head around.
Yeah.
But like on a physiological level, knowing like I was in, really my grandmother's womb,
Right. Yeah.
right?
You are. Like the
Yeah.
eggs go
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
And so when you think about that and the stressors that potentially she was under and then my mother was under, because of the stressors my like like you can kind of like see how that could be too.
Well, also, I've done a lot of speaking to a couple of groups in Parkinson's groups in the New York area that are primarily Jewish. And one of the things I've talked to them about is the ancestral trauma that they carry,
Hmm.
from, like, that grandmother or grandfather who was in the Holocaust and survived, carries a huge amount of grief and uh, maybe unresolved trauma, uh, you know, ancestrally and as a whole people.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, I am really glad we got to spend this time together, Martha.
Me too. It was great talking to you again.
Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on your book. And I love the name because I mean, for so long. I believe it's all interconnected. My mother had breast cancer young, and something about that, she was under a tremendous amount of stress and in a relationship, and then raising kids alone. And of course, back then we were, growing up on Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels and parquet margarine and whatever else.
Right. Yeah.
So, we were inundated in all the directions of just a lot of stress. And I don't know, but it's just stuck with me something um, that she had said because she was sort of, I think at one point believed that there was a metaphysical reason for her illness and a spiritual reason, or the disease, the breast cancer diagnosis. And then, but since I don't think she just thinks it's coincidence. And I'm not sure like what happened there. I love her, but like somewhere along the line, she was going down that path, and then maybe it was just too much. Because when if you're looking at disease through that lens, sometimes it's hard to digest.
Yes, it is. Going back to the gut again, we have gut problems because there are things we don't want to digest.
Yeah, we don't want to look at, we don't want to see clearly, we don't want to acknowledge, and that can be very, it just can bring up a lot of feelings of discomfort, and so yeah, so it's I don't want, it's kind of, it's the more difficult road to travel, I think. Um, so. Anyway, I want to make sure everybody can find you and find your Substack and your book. I know it's available on Amazon, but it might be other places. And then, of course, your amazing probiotics. Anybody struggling with like sugar, the sugar shift is fantastic.
Yeah, so you can find me, so you can find the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble online. You can order it from a local bookstore. I'm always encouraging people to support their local bookstores. So you would have to order it, but you know, it's not going to take much longer than it would take to get from Amazon. And uh, you can find, I write on BiotiQuest about gut health. So that's BiotiQuest.com. Um, and then if you go to Substack, if people are or are not familiar with Substack, that's a long form writing format. It people also podcast and do. I mean, it's becoming quite a interesting platform. And I write there under Martha's Quest, or you can probably search my name, and it would come up as well. And I write about a lot of different topics. Some of them are Parkinson's related, but the foot series is not particularly Parkinson's related. I'm doing a series on membranes and lipids. And then sometimes I just write about whatever like comes to my mind that I feel like might be interesting. And so those are probably the best places to find me. And there's ways to get it. If you go to any of those websites, if you want to get in touch with me personally, there's ways to get in touch with me. And, I'm happy to answer questions for people with Parkinson's or really anything gut related. And just happy to be with you again today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I don't know that we talked about it, but the prevention piece, do you bring that up a little bit, like how to potentially prevent maybe? I guess.
Well, that's part of that simple
Okay.
place to start that's at the back. It's it's for people who already have an issue, but also, if you follow those things from a preventative perspective, making sure you have bowel regularity, you have clean water, you're not eating processed foods. Those are some of the most basic, but also, clean air. Another kind of odd thing that people don't think about. But, I go through some of those, and it's like you don't have to be perfect, but you just need to start to be more mindful about what you're putting into your body because you are what you eat.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Martha. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And I think did I get was I calling it BioQuest and not BodyQuest? I'm sorry
Yeah,
if so,
that's
but
a
I'm glad you clarified that because my audience would have been going to the wrong place.
well, thank you.
Thank you.